Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I personally found very particularly interesting. And the news, of course, is going to be about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, who, in my opinion, is still one of the best and one of the greatest fighters in the world. But the next fight that apparently he is about to take, it is going to be a great indicator of how truly great and also how truly intelligent, in my opinion, or just overall what is the max amount of weight that Canelo Alvarez can handle. We all know that Canelo, that in terms of weight, of course, that he does balloon up in terms of 185 or somewhere around there. But we all know that Canelo, in terms of stature, in terms of height and reach, that he pretty much is a natural 160 pounder. So Canelo, in my opinion, I pretty much count him as a natural 160 pounder. And the fact that Canelo has been able to accomplish some of the things that he's been able to accomplish, I believe overall shows overall a certain amount of the greatness that he has showed within the past several years. And I think that he's a highly intelligent fighter. However, what I will say is this. Apparently, he is going to rematch Mr. Dmitry Bivol, which is what I stated Canelo Alvarez would do, exactly what I stated that he would do. And of course, there was a certain amount of people that maybe came on my channel to where you could clearly tell that they did not like Canelo Alvarez, and they said, "Oh well, Canelo, there's no way he takes the fight. He ducks all the hard fights." I've been saying this about Canelo for a very long time, and it's not that I agree necessarily with every decision that Canelo Alvarez makes, but you cannot have the names that Canelo has had in his career and resume and just be a person that is avoiding all the tough fights. That doesn't make any sense. You're talking about a guy that once again fought Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, Miguel Cotto, Sergey Kovalev, Danny Jacobs, Gennady Triple G Golovkin, Adesanya Lara, Austin Trout, and probably even a couple of other names if you wanted to add them to the list, maybe like a Chavez Jr. if you wanted to, although I never seen him truly as an A-grade fighter. But Canelo really has a great list of names. But the big question is will he be able to defeat someone on the level and also the someone, with the size of a Dmitry Bivol? And some people may say, well, the size is really just an excuse because we all know that Canelo, that he balloons up. Well, Canelo might balloon up, but Canelo, once again, in my opinion, is pretty much a natural middleweight. There's also other certain middleweights that kind of rehydrate around his weight, same as Gennady Golovkin, or maybe if you wanted to, you could state that Canelo, that maybe he's in terms of weight more of a natural 168 pounder if you wanted to. I'm still going to claim that he's a middleweight because he's around the same size as what a Gennady Golovkin is, and maybe a couple of the other guys that were personally there. He pretty much has the same thick dimensions, and I'm not really sure if I would claim that Gennady Golovkin, in my opinion, is a natural 168 pounder. But anyways, just to talk once again a little bit more about Canelo Alvarez, it's going to be very interesting to see if he can handle the skill combined with the size of Dmitry Bivol in the rematch. And I thought that Canelo probably in the first fight that he won probably around 4 rounds. There's a couple of people, of course, or many other people that believe that he maybe even won fewer than that, and I certainly understand. But it's going to be very interesting to see how Canelo Alvarez improves because I still see the skill set there, but it's going to be very interesting to see how we really adjust in this rematch, especially if it's at 175 once again. So it's going to be very interesting. And if Canelo does end up losing this fight, it's also going to be very interesting to see where he goes on from here. But anyways, overall, let's get into the video. Let's see what Dante has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So I expected Canelo Alvarez to wait to the very, very last minute to confirm who he will be fighting next. Canelo Alvarez surprisingly came out and just recently announced that he will be fighting Bivol in May. His exact words was he will be looking for revenge in May.
Well, in my opinion, it's not really that surprising because once again, I've been saying this for a very long time. Canelo takes a lot of the big fights. Once again, that doesn't mean that he takes every fight all in all that's out there or that, he's just fought everyone that he's needed to. But once again, a lot of people truly don't know what a true cherry picker is. A true cherry picker is someone like a Mikey Garcia or someone overall a little bit like that of a Gervonta Tank Davis, someone that clearly is not willing to face a lot of the top names. And there might be a couple of other names that I'm personally missing, but those are main ones all in all that they've avoided a certain amount of the tough fights. Maybe even Ryan if you wanted to go there, but I don't know if I'll go with Ryan because Ryan has never even won an official belt in his career, so I'm not really going to go there. And Gervonta Tank Davis, to be fair to him, he might be waiting on Ryan Garcia. That might be the personal advice that he's following, so I don't know. But all in all, once again, you can't have the names that Canelo has had in his career and just be a quote unquote cherry picker. That's not how that works. The man is not only a 4-weight division champion, but pretty much beat the best of the best in every division that he's been in, or at least in the majority of them.
Which, if Canelo keeps his word, that's bad news for Canelo and Canelo Alvarez fans for obvious reasons. There's a very good chance that Canelo Alvarez could possibly get stopped in the rematch, assuming he fights more aggressive, which would make sense for.
I'm not going to say that Canelo Alvarez gets stopped, in my opinion, because I think that Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, has a decent amount more boxing ability than that of a Gilberto Zeta Ramirez. And Canelo, even though, once again, I believe that he's somewhat of a natural middleweight, it's very clear that because of the weight that he's able to balloon up in, and also overall because of his thickness, that, or his thick stature, in terms of, verticality, or excuse me, not verticality, but horizontally when it comes down to it, that he's able to somewhat take those punches. But at the end of the day, he still is going to be about either 2 or 1.5 weight classes smaller than that of a Dmitry Bivol. And on top of that, he's dealing with a fighter that is very, very greatly skilled. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Canelo does in this fight. And I think whether Canelo Alvarez wins or loses, that it's still a great fight to take. But it is going to be very interesting to see how Canelo does in this fight. And if he does lose to Dmitry Bivol once again, it's going to be very interesting to see how he does against certain fighters like a Jamal Charlo or someone overall like a David Benavidez. But in my opinion, the only way that Canelo could possibly regain his #1 pound-for-pound title is defeating Dmitry Bivol in a rematch.
To fight more aggressive, because if he sits back and tries to outbox Bivol, he has zero chance. Now, Bivol had made it very clear that if it was up to...
I would pretty much agree with that. And that's not me stating that Canelo does not need to move in and out kind of like he does at certain times. And he's not someone that, uses his feet quite as often as some other fighters that I've seen, but he uses it enough. Canelo knows when to move in and outside of range, and because his defense is so elite, usually it's very hard to hit him. And even if you take a look at certain highlights from the Dmitry Bivol fight, even when Canelo Alvarez has no stamina whatsoever, a lot of the times Dmitry Bivol is not hitting him flush, because Canelo's head movement and his defense is usually very, very overall superb. But it's going to be very interesting to see. Canelo will have to be in the best conditioning of his life. I think that, in my opinion, that he needs to lower the weight of what he was in the first fight. I think he gained way too much muscle mass, thinking that he was just going to be able to bully Dmitry Bivol, and that's not going to happen. But it's also going to be very interesting because a better version of Dmitry Bivol might also show up in this fight because he may have more confidence. So it's going to be very interesting. But what Canelo, in my opinion, is going to have to do in this fight is that he's going to have to pressure Dmitry Bivol pretty much the whole entire time. He has to make him very, very uncomfortable. And he has to start going to the body very early on. He cannot be afraid to throw at Dmitry Bivol. Of course, he needs to keep his hands up and move in and outside of range. But he's going to have to cut off the ring against Dmitry Bivol the whole entire time. He has no option. Because if he tries to outbox Dmitry Bivol on the outside or possibly even in the middle of the ring, he might be able to get away with it in the middle of the ring here and there in some small moments. But not for the whole entire fight. When you have a guy that is on the level of a Dmitry Bivol who might even be an A-plus fighter, usually the bigger fighter between two A-plus fighters, the bigger guy is usually going to be the smaller guy, unless the other guy has such a significant advantage in skill set. But Canelo, if he's an A-plus fighter, and if Dmitry Bivol is not, he might be an A-grade fighter. Definitely not an A- fighter. He's at least on A. But I think that Dmitry Bivol is A+. So it's going to be very interesting to see, once again, how Canelo adjusts and how he reacts.
He would prefer to become undisputed at 175 and fight Beterbiev next. But he also said right after he beat Ramirez that it wasn't up to him ultimately, his decision, which was a clear indication that Bivol was saying that if DAZN and Eddie Hearn, if they push for the Canelo Alvarez rematch, he's going to take it. And it makes more sense for him to take the Canelo Alvarez rematch because Bivol, or Beterbiev, I should say, he's already scheduled to fight his mandatory Anthony Yarde, I believe, in January. And let me tell you, that's a real tough fight for Beterbiev. He might not even win that fight. But when it comes to Canelo, it looks like...
I need to know overall why Dante and these channels have been hyping up Anthony Yarde to the great degree. Now, of course, certain people may say, well, because he's a black fighter and these guys love to hype up certain black fighters. But Anthony Yarde is a guy that already has 2 losses. I mean, this guy lost to Sergey Kovalev that allegedly was completely washed up overall against Canelo. And don't get me wrong, he clearly was not the same crusher Kovalev as he was, against Andre Ward. I don't think there's no denying that, or any denying that, excuse me. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, like, I just don't really see what he sees in Anthony Yard. They say that he's got some slick ability. He has some decent ability, and he's a great athlete. But I also see him as way too flawed, way too hittable. He's already a guy that got knocked out against a fighter that, if Anthony Yard ever was going to become an A-grade champion, he should have beat Sergey Kovalev. I don't see him as viably beating Beterbiev. I think Beterbiev is probably going to knock him out within about 6 to 7 rounds. But I may have to watch a little bit more of Anthony Yard.
His luck has finally ran out. And when I say his luck, I'm talking about his luck of being able to pick the opponents that would guarantee him a win. Promoter Eddie Hearn.
There's been no guaranteed victory for Canelo Alvarez ever since he fought Austin Trout and Floyd Mayweather Jr. Very rarely here and there. Of course, he would get, fights like that maybe against Amir Khan or maybe like that overall against Anavni Yildirim. But once again, Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith and Caleb Plant, those were never guaranteed victories. And once again, keep in mind that these channels, they were always singing the praises of those fighters until Canelo Alvarez fought them. And I've already told people this. The only reason why they gas up certain fighters like a David Benavidez and certain things like that, certain fighters that are not black fighters, that, overall, fighters that they don't usually praise, it's usually to tear down someone else. That's the reason why they like David Benavidez, because it makes Canelo look so bad. That's the main reason why they push him.
He admitted that he advised Canelo Alvarez not to take the immediate rematch with Bivol because 2 losses back-to-back would not be a good look for Canelo Alvarez's career.
Well, on top of that, when you take an ass whooping like that, which is what Canelo Alvarez did, I don't think there's any shame in saying that. He's a great fighter, but he did get thoroughly embarrassed. It just is what it is. He was completely gassed out, and overall there were certain rounds to where he certainly did get outboxed. It just is what it is. But overall, when it comes down to, once again, you can clearly tell by Dante's tone that he just doesn't really like Canelo Alvarez. Because when it comes to certain other fighters, he has completely, a complete different tone. So that's why I keep saying a lot of these channels, they're not logical, they're not objective. All these guys are basically, overall, once again, is politicians. That's really all they are. ESPN and Fox Sports News are on one side and these guys are on another.
Obviously meaning it would be hard for Canelo Alvarez to come back from something like that. Well, I got bad news for Eddie and Canelo Alvarez. Even after he loses this rematch, it's still going to be hard for him to come back from that. Because once again, he got completely dominated in the first fight. And just like Devin Haney versus George Kambosos, the rematch is going to be much worse for Canelo. Bivol will be far more confident than he was in the...
Well, it could potentially be that, and I understand where Dante is coming from. But Canelo Alvarez was really not at 100% in that fight. And a lot of people are going to say, what are you talking about? That's just an excuse. No, it's not really an excuse. It's obvious that Canelo Alvarez was completely gassed out. He had no stamina whatsoever. It just is what it is. And certain people can say that's an excuse. Listen, there are certain times to where there is truly an excuse that isn't viable. But it's very obvious that Canelo Alvarez, that he was completely gassed out. His stamina was horrible. Probably even worse overall in that fight than what it was in the Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight. It was awful. So it is what it is. Now, for whatever reason, overall, that may be, whether you want to allege PEDs or whether you want to allege vegan diet or whatever it may be, or gaining the weight, that's up to you. But at the end of the day, it's very obvious that Canelo, that his stamina was not in tip-top shape. So it's going to be interesting. But once again, if I had to predict the fight, but once again, I have no personal ties with these fighters, I probably, would predict Dmitry Bivol to win the fight about 8 rounds to 4, 7 rounds to 5, somewhere around there. But if Canelo Alvarez ended up pulling off the fight 7 rounds to 5, I wouldn't really be shocked. Because once again, Canelo is not only a great fighter in my opinion, he's an all-time great fighter. However, if he does end up losing to Dmitry Bivol, he is going to have to take the Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez fights. And those fights are going to be very particularly interesting. I don't really think overall that Jamal Charlo really has the highest of chances in my opinion. But David Benavidez would be interesting just because if he fights him immediately after maybe he were to lose to Dmitry Bivol, speaking hypothetically, of course, when it comes down to it, as many of you may think that he may lose, but depending on what happens, if he faces David Benavidez straight after that, it's going to be interesting to see where Canelo Alvarez is at. But in my opinion, for Canelo to regain the number 1 pound-for-pound spot, he's going to have to try to defeat Dmitry Bivol because in my opinion, I just don't think David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo, I don't see those guys as A-plus fighters. I see them as A-grade fighters, but not as A-plus fighters.
First fight, because now he knows that.
And I've already stated this, if Canelo is actually able to defeat Dmitry Bivol in a rematch, because I would not favor him to win against probably, in my opinion, an A-plus fighter, one of the only two fighters that truly has a chance against Canelo within pretty much 3 or 4 weight divisions, I would have to put Canelo within my top 20 of all time. Right now, he's in my top 30. Right now, he's there with Andre Ward and Joe Calzaghe. He's right there with Tommy Hearns. He's right there with all those guys, all those boys. But, if you were able to defeat Dmitry Bivol, I would have to put him a level above all those fighters.
Canelo has really nothing to offer. Bivol is going to most likely be a lot more aggressive trying to go for the knockout in the rematch, because I think that he was playing it a little bit safe.
I don't think that he's going to get the knockout against Canelo Alvarez because Canelo was completely gassed in the first fight. And, I mean, there's certain people that would allege that Dmitry Bivol held back some punches. I don't think that he held back, but I do think that he was feeling Canelo Alvarez out and that he is going to be more confident in the rematch. I don't see him knocking Canelo Alvarez out. But, overall what I will say is this. If he ended up beating Canelo 8 rounds to 4 or 7 rounds to 5, I wouldn't be surprised. So once again, right now I would have to favor Dmitry Bivol by either unanimous or split decision. But if Canelo Alvarez ended up winning it, I wouldn't be surprised either. And Canelo, more than likely, if he is going to win the fight, he's probably going to win it about 7 rounds to 5. But we'll see.
That first fight, just to guarantee the win and not make any silly mistakes. I also think Bivol is looking at it like this. I mean, he just fought Ramirez. He just fought Gilberto Ramirez, who was way bigger than Bivol. He was well over 200 pounds when they fought. So you go from completely dominating Ramirez, that easy, to now going back to fighting against a much shorter Canelo Alvarez, that by Canelo's own admission has stamina issues.
Right, but basically, Dante, what you're stating is that the size, quote unquote, excuse, that it really is not an excuse. Basically, what you're saying is that there's some viability overall with saying that Canelo is clearly outsized against Dmitry Bivol, which he clearly is. Not just in terms of weight, but in terms of size and height. You got to remember, Canelo only has a 72-inch reach, and he's about 5'9", if even that. Maybe a little bit taller, maybe a little bit shorter, give or take. So once again, the fact that Canelo has accomplished that much in his career, you do have to give him a great amount of credit. However, this fight, once again, is going to tell us how truly great he is. Or is he going to be on the level of potentially the greatest of all time? Because if he ends up defeating Dmitry Bivol, that's going to be a very, very great argument of having Canelo, certainly in my top 20 of all time. He may even possibly make my top 10 if he ends up defeating Dmitry Bivol.
Promise you this will not end well for Canelo Alvarez, and it'll be really interesting to see how he will bounce back from a second loss to Bivol. I always tell you guys, historically, whenever fighters lose the most important fights of their career, after that, they usually feel like they don't have too much to lose. So they usually start taking on challenges that they never would have took on before to make up for all of those big losses, because they don't want to be remembered that way.
I would agree overall, but once again, Canelo's been taking fights for the majority of his career. So Dante is going to try to put it overall in this, context to where, Canelo only fought Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez now because he was finally forced into a corner. No, I just think that Canelo Alvarez was waiting for the right times for those fights to happen. Now, some people may say, well, are you saying that it's the perfect time to happen after 2 losses? No, but I think that I think he really wanted to see what his peak potential was. And if he could have unified at 175 pounds, he knew that that was going to make a great argument for him being the greatest fighter of all time.
With Manny Pacquiao after he lost to Floyd Mayweather, and it was something that I had predicted. I had told you guys previously that I thought Manny Pacquiao would start taking fights that he wouldn't have took before, like the Errol Spence fight, for example. You guys remember there were times when Manny Pacquiao put out tweets saying that he wanted Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. And this was all because, once again, he had lost the fight of the decade. The most important fight of his career was against Floyd Mayweather. The same thing happened to Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran, he lost almost all of the most important fights of his career. He lost to Sugar Ray Leonard. He lost to Hearns. He lost to
I will overall say that about Mr. Roberto Duran. And I've said that about Roberto Duran in the past, that, in my opinion, in terms of his ranking, sometimes he's a little bit overrated, in my opinion. And a lot of people overall would disagree, but in my opinion, Roberto Duran is not as great as Manny Pacquiao. Now, there's certain things, in my opinion, that Roberto Duran does better than Manny Pacquiao, but overall, when it comes to winning and winning in weight classes, now, of course, I believe there was less weight classes during Duran's time. But at the end of the day, a lot of the times when Duran moved up in weight, he ended up losing some of the bigger fights in his career. Not just some, but a lot. I mean, he even ended up losing, I believe, to Wilfredo Benitez. I believe that one fighter that ended up losing to Tommy Hearn, Sugar Ray Leonard, and a couple of others. So it's not like Roberto Duran would just lose overall to, the best of the best. And some of those guys were the best of the best. But in my opinion, Duran, he's been a bit overrated, at least if you're going to rank him top 5 of all time. Maybe he makes that top 10, but I'm not quite so sure about top 5. Manny Pacquiao, in my opinion, in terms of the wins that he has, whether you think that he was on steroids or not, in my opinion, he is probably a little bit above Roberto Duran. In terms of Canelo, I don't have him on the same level as either of those fighters right now, but, because, of course, Roberto Duran, he was able to beat Sugar Ray Leonard. But at the end of the day, once again, if Canelo was actually able to defeat Dmitry Bivol, it's going to be a very interesting argument to see where Canelo Alvarez is after that.
He lost to Wilfredo Benitez. After he lost to all of those guys, then he started to take on undefeated, young, hungry lions to once again try to make up for those defeats. And it didn't make up for those defeats.
Well, I don't really know all the history about Roberto Duran, so I can't necessarily talk. But from what I know, there wasn't a lot of fighters that Roberto Duran really avoided. He fought a lot of decently great fighters, especially at lightweight. But I can't really comment once again because I don't know a lot of the history about him. But it seems like he took a lot of great fights. I mean, he wasn't just a fighter all in all that, just wouldn't take fights for a long time. He fought them all. He fought Marvin Hagler, and of course he wasn't naturally a middleweight. He fought Tommy Hearns. He wasn't naturally his size. He wasn't even naturally Sugar Ray Leonard's size. And he was actually able to beat Sugar Ray Leonard. He's really the only clear one out of all 3 of those guys overall that actually was able to beat Sugar Ray Leonard clearly. So Roberto Duran does have a debate, in my opinion, not as the greatest fighter of that generation, but if not overall, number 2, number 3. So you could debate him either at number 2 or number 3, for me anyway.
But it definitely shined a better light on him as opposed to just being remembered by losing to all of the best fighters and quitting against Sugar Ray Leonard in a rematch. And it's very possible that Canelo Alvarez may attempt to do the exact same thing once he gets dominated by Bivol a second time. Either his pride is not...
Well, once again, I think that Canelo, if he does lose to Bivol, or even if he if he ends up beating Dmitry Bivol, more than likely he's probably going to try to go after Artur Beterbiev. If Beterbiev is, if he does beat Anthony Yarde, which in my opinion, more than likely that he will. But if he ends up losing to Dmitry Bivol, he's probably going to say, okay, this is pretty much my limit. I can't really beat the A-plus fighters or the A-grade fighters. Overall at 175 pounds is a little bit too much for me. I should probably go on to fight David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo.
Going to allow him to retire and be remembered that way, or he's just going to accept the way his career played out and just retire. We'll see soon what he decides to do. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
All right. But anyways, that's really about it. But I thought that video was very particularly interesting. And once again, you notice that Dante is now giving Canelo Alvarez a lot of credit. Keep in mind, once again, that they stated that that he was going to avoid the Dmitry Bivol rematch. So that shows you that Canelo, once again, he is enemy number 1. Okay? So it is what it is. But anyways, very particularly overall interesting video. I just thought that I would review that. But overall, wish the best of luck to both men. Going to be very, very particularly interesting. And it's going to be very interesting because, in my opinion, if there is a perfect type of style to defeat Dmitry Bivol, it is Canelo. And if there's a perfect type of style, in my opinion, to defeat someone like a Canelo, it's Dmitry Bivol when they're both at their best. So it's going to be very interesting. I personally would predict Dmitry Bivol to win by unanimous decision at the current moment or split decision. But you never know what's going to happen. Canelo is a great fighter, so we'll see. But he is going to have to make certain adjustments, and Bivol's also going to have to make certain adjustments as well. So anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.